But yeah, and the resolve of this thing, and
Bill, I'm interested.
What I'm saying is that I don't think so much the world changed today is the fact that for a few hours it changed, and I'm listening tonight here is a lot of the whining of the younger generations versus those.
Well, Bill, if you would let me get a word in edgewise here, Bill, I just wanted to ask you about the reactions of some of the older generations, the men you were with earlier today, and people who have seen dark days before.
They were shocked. And the compassion they had, the problem this is happening, but there was not this. What I've heard tonight, some of this thing about, I'll never be the same. These men, one man did mention. He said Pearl Harbor, but it's something that we stood up with and did, and.
Hard to argue that the world was not the same afterwards.
Huh?
Hard to argue that the world was the same afterwards, though.
Well, it wasn't the same afterwards, but it was a world that did not all of a sudden black days forever. It was not a world in which these men lived in fear forever. It was not this is a world in which they took the challenge and went on and created, obviously,
Bill, thanks very much for your call. I'm afraid we're running out of time. NPR's continual coverage of today's events will continue after a short break. I'm Neil Conan. You're listening to a special report from NPR News.
You're in tune with listener-supported KUAZ 89.1 FM. Stay tuned for more news coverage from NPR about today's tragic events in New York and Washington.
This is a special report from NPR News. I'm Neil Conan in Washington. With me in the studio, NPR's Richard Harris. We're following the day's events as news continues to develop on the aftermath of the bombings at the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan, where 2 airplanes crashed into those buildings and they subsequently collapsed. A third hijacked airliner crashed into the Pentagon outside across the Potomac River from Washington, D.C. A fourth hijacked airliner crashed into a wooded area in southwestern Pennsylvania, not far from the Maryland border. All of the people aboard all of the aircraft are known to be dead. There are many other casualties, killed and injured. The numbers are just beginning to come in. There can only be fear that those numbers will be very high. Joining us now on the line is Ira Flato, the host of NPR's Science Friday, and he is in Stamford, Connecticut. Ira was a fine reporter before he got into the science dodge. And Ira, where have you been this evening?
Well, I've been out looking at some of the people and talking with some of the people who've been in churches and synagogues around Stamford here. And what you come away with is that, Stamford is a bedroom community of New York. And like many bedroom communities of New York City, just about everyone in town knows someone who worked in the World Trade Center. And while you can read, as you did earlier, the list of the dead on an airplane, there is no list of the dead in the World Trade Center. So what you find is that people are just waiting for their phone to ring, for their loved one, their wife, their husband, some word of someone who did not show up on the train today on the way home, who did not call to say they weren't coming home or where they were. And so a lot of these churches and synagogues are serving as places where people can get together and ask one another, did so-and-so make it out of the World Trade Center today? Do you know if he got home or she got home? And so in not just as spiritual places, but actually meeting places where people can commiserate and find out what happened to their friends and relatives in the World Trade Center.